Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we share some information on the Austin Creative Worker Relief Grant. My name is Laura Odegaard, and I'm from the Economic Development Department of the City of Austin, and I want to thank you for your attendance today and your participation in this webinar. The City of Austin is working diligently to launch economic relief programs for various populations impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic. The City of Austin is hosting this webinar with our partners today, the Austin Better Business Bureau, who is our grant administrator, Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts, who is providing consultation and support to applicants, and two of our community champions. We have Amy from the Asian American Community Partnership and Cynthia from La Peña, who are helping conduct outreach for the program. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elisa from Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts to kick off the webinar.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Elisa McCain, and I'm from Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts, which is widely known as TALA. Before I go through an agenda with you, I want to share a bit about the fund, share some housekeeping items, and introduce you to another team available to help you with this grant. The $3.5 million available through this program was provided to the City of Austin through the Federal CARES Act. The Austin City Council and the City of Austin Economic Development Department partnered with the Austin Better Business Bureau and TALA to distribute the funds. Our team at TALA works with creatives in Austin each day, and that makes us a natural fit for helping the city with the task of accepting and reviewing applications. We're excited to help with this program and give you a small taste of what our commitment is to the creative community. There are a few housekeeping items to cover so that everyone understands how the webinar will work. To cut down on noise, we are muting attendees during the webinar. You can submit questions via the online chat. We will try to answer directly in the chat or at the end of the webinar. A list of frequently asked questions will be continuously updated on the atxrecovers.com website. That will be a good resource for you after the webinar. Additionally, a recording of the webinar will be posted at that same website, atxrecovers.com, tomorrow. Before we get to the agenda, I want to introduce Cynthia Perez from La Peña, which is serving as a community champion to help the City of Austin, the Austin Better Business Bureau, and TALA inform the community about this program. With that, I'll turn it over to Cynthia from La Peña to tell you more about the organization. Cynthia, can you get on? Okay, I'm going to skip Cynthia for a second while we're having a technical difficulty and go to Amy Mock with the Asian American Community Partnership, who is also a community champion and assisting us get the word out about the grant.
Hi, my name is Amy Mock. I'm with the Asian American Community Partnership. My role here for this grant is to help reach out to the Asian American creative community, either organization or individuals who have suffered from the COVID-19. And this grant is, a maximum of $2,000. Hopefully it will give you some relief to help you with the rent, with some of the essentials, so that you know that the City of Austin is trying to support our creative community. And I'm here to really making sure that you feel comfortable in applying for the grant. I know folks in our community are not familiar with grant application process. And so hopefully you're not afraid, because we are here to offer you support, and we will make sure that you fill out whatever it takes to submit a successful application. I am not the one who decide whether you're going to get the grant or not. But I will be here to give you whatever you need to fill out and submit a successful application, so that the review committee will have whatever information it needs to review your application fairly, justly, and with all the necessary information. And this is a very short turnaround time. It's only 2 weeks. So I am available every day, and I'm going to answer your questions every day, and I'm going to send out a mass email. I know you're getting sick and tired already. You have already received 5 emails from me, you know, before and during and now after. So whatever questions that you have, feel free to send it to me, and then we'll post it so everybody get the full picture of what this grant is about. So I'm here for you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I wanted to go back and give Cynthia a chance to speak about La Pena if she's able to. Cynthia, can you join us, hear us at all? Okay, I'm going to go forward. If Cynthia joins us, we'll hear from her at the end. During this webinar, we will review an overview of the program, eligibility requirements, eligible and ineligible expenses, the application process, and the evaluation criteria and awarding of grants. Additionally, we will have time for questions at the end. Again, during the webinar, you may submit questions through the chat, and we'll answer as many as possible following the presentation. First, let me share a bit of information about how the Austin City Council opted to allocate the funds for creative individuals. Through this federally funded program, $3.5 million is available to assist individual creative workers in Austin. Applicants may apply for $2,000 grants to help offset costs of rent, bills, groceries, and other eligible expenses. These are grants and will not need to be repaid by recipients. Recipients of the Austin Music Disaster Relief Fund may apply for this program, but they are only eligible for $1,000. Applications will be accepted between August 17th, 2020 at 10 a.m. and August 28th, 2020 at 5 p.m. This is not a first-come, first-served program. All eligible applications submitted before the August 28th, 2020 deadline will be considered for funding. For purposes of the Austin Creative Worker Relief Grant, creative worker is defined as an individual whose current or primary occupation is or has been within cultural, arts, film, music, heritage, preservation, and more. This can include, but is not limited to, artists working in the creative sector like musicians, actors, dancers, and sculptors, and staff and associated personnel working in organizations within the creative sector like curators, sound designers, light technicians, and others. Disciplines include the following: animation, architecture, ceramics, comedy or improv, dance and choreography, fashion design, film and TV, folk and traditional art, furniture design, gaming, graphic design, healing arts and arts therapy, historic and historic preservation, installation or public art, jewelry design, literary arts, metalworking, music, music composition and music industry, staff, new music, tech and digital arts, new media, tech and digital arts, painting, illustration, performing and theater arts, photography, printmaking, radio, sculpture, textile and fiber arts, web-based content production, and woodworking. Now I'm going to share information about eligibility requirements and what would make an individual ineligible. In order to be eligible, an applicant must have a verified home address in a City of Austin Council district. You must be an active creative worker for at least 2 years. That's an artist working in the creative sector, such as a musician, actor, dancer, or sculptor, or staff and associated personnel working in organizations within the creative sector, such as curators, sound designers, and light technicians. And you must be over 18 years old on the date of application. An individual is ineligible for the Austin Creative Worker Relief Grant if they are arts organization board members who have no other creative sector activity, individual creative sector workers who have not been active during the past 2 years, individuals under 18 years old on the date of the application, permanent full-time City of Austin employees, members of any City of Austin Commission or Board, and individuals who reside outside an Austin City Council district. Applicants that meet the eligibility requirements also need to be aware of the kinds of expenses the grant can be used to cover. The purpose of the grant is to offset expenses made between March 1st, 2020 and August 17th, 2020. The eligible expenses include rent and mortgage, food and other necessities, non-recovered expenses from canceled events, inventory, supplies for the artistic practice, insurance and medical expenses, and personal protective equipment and sanitation supplies. Some expenses that are not eligible under the grant provisions are costs incurred prior to March 1st, 2020 or after August 17th, 2020, expenses paid by other grants or loans, and lost income from canceled events. Next, we have some information about the application process. Be aware that an individual applicant can only apply for one grant. The application must be filled out completely and include your contact information, demographic information, artistic discipline or industry, wages or earnings, and an explanation of the impacts of COVID-19. Finally, applicants will need to include some basic documentation to verify their employment in this sector. Again, the $2,000 grant is intended to offset expenses between March 1st, 2020 and August 17th, 2020. You will be required to give us a rough idea of how the grant will help you offset your expenses. This will be done through the following table. Please note, all rows do not have to be filled out. For an example, if you are applying for a $2,000 grant, you may put $1,000 for rent payment, $500 for food, and $500 for medical expenses. You do not have to supply the documentation or receipts at this time. If there is an audit of this grant, we will require proof of eligible payments offset by this grant. If you already received a grant through the Austin Music Disaster Relief Fund, you are only eligible for a $1,000 grant and only need to show an expense breakdown for $1,000. You will need to upload documents that show how you have been an active creative worker in Austin. This could be a biography, resume, discography, portfolio, curriculum vitae, or other type of documentation that demonstrates active participation in the creative sector in Austin during the past 2 years. Finally, you'll also need to verify the application, including any of the following. You will not sue the City of Austin, the Austin Better Business Bureau, or Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. You have experienced financial hardship due to COVID-19. You are a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. This is a requirement due to the source of federal funds. You have provided true and accurate information. And if audited, you will be required to provide documentation validating your claims in the application. Since the available grant money is limited, the city created a scoring criteria that the Austin Better Business Bureau will use to award the funds. The city provided the Austin Better Business Bureau with criteria to use for the determination of grant eligibility. Every eligible application will be evaluated against a scoring matrix that includes criteria for vulnerability and equity. For distribution of funds, 50% of the program funding will be allocated to applicants that score the highest according to this matrix. The remaining 50% of funds will be awarded by random lottery among eligible applicants. Individuals from historically marginalized communities are especially encouraged to apply. The scoring matrix will evaluate the following criteria designed to review equity and vulnerability: race and ethnicity, genders, LGBTQIA, disability, ability to operate during stay-at-home orders, and annual earnings and wages. The demand for assistance to creatives in Austin is high. A random lottery is the finalized process given the high volume of interest and need, establishing a fair system to manage access and ensure equitable participation. Now that you've seen the grant criteria, I want to share a bit about the review process. The Austin Better Business Bureau is serving as the city's partner to award the Austin Creative Worker Relief Grants. Their team will evaluate and score eligible applications as they are submitted. As I mentioned, 50% of the program funding will be allocated to applicants that score the highest according to the matrix. The remaining 50% of funds will be awarded by random lottery among eligible applicants. If a creative worker is awarded a grant, BBB will send funds directly to the individual. The goal is to provide individuals feedback on their applications within 10 business days. However, notification may be delayed if the volume of applications is higher than expected. Additionally, having to go back to applicants who don't provide necessary information could also slow down the process. The City of Austin is striving to provide these grants to individuals from historically underrepresented communities. Therefore, we want to strongly encourage individuals meeting that criteria to apply. We also wanted to share what those who apply could expect. Once an application has been submitted, the applicant will receive a confirmation email. You also will have the ability to work on your application in stages, meaning that you can save progress and come back to it. The Austin Better Business Bureau intends to notify applicants of questions or further documentation needed within 10 business days of receiving an application. As a final reminder, the application period is from August 17th through August 28th at 5 p.m. Before we open it up for questions, I wanted to provide a few key points for you to be aware of. Everything you need to get started and submit your application can be found at www.atxrecovers.com. In addition to the application link, you'll also find frequently asked questions, a downloadable checklist, and webinar recordings. For eligibility questions and assistance completing an application, you may contact Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts by email at creativeworkergrant@talarts.org or by phone at 512-588-9971. For technical support and application status, contact the Austin Better Business Bureau by email at creativeworkergrant@austin.bbb.org or by phone at 512-318-2683. With that, we're now going to take questions. Helping to facilitate answering these questions are the City of Austin, the Austin Better Business Bureau, La Pena, and the Asian American Community Partnership.
All right. As we get started with the question side of things, I'm just going to go up further up in the chat and just try to recap for everyone, just in case you didn't see some of the questions that were asked earlier. So one of the questions was, what are the requirements? Can bartenders and part-time security guards for live music venues qualify? The answer to that is yes. If you work at a venue, it has to meet the definitions that the city has already established to be classified as a live music venue or a performing arts venue or a museum/gallery space. And so the definitions for those are all on the ATX Recovers Creative Worker Relief Grant site toward the bottom. And so live music venue, there are very specific descriptions for those, but most of the music venues that you think of around town do count and fall under those requirements. So short answer is yes, bartenders and part-time security guards that work at live music venues are valuable parts of the creative ecosystem and would be eligible to apply under this program. We had another question about type of documentation beyond a resume. So again, on the FAQ list that we have on the website, there's a whole host of things that you can use to show documentation of being an active creative worker for the past 2 years in Austin. we try to give some examples. So that could be a resume or a CV or a biography. It could be screenshots of your LinkedIn work history. It could be press that demonstrates your involvement. It could be your portfolio from the past few years, marketing materials, etc. So we try to keep that pretty open. So if you have questions about what could count, you're welcome to follow up with Elisa and her team at Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts, and they'd be happy to walk you through if what you have is acceptable. We had a question about if someone has applied for a small business relief grant, are you still eligible for this? Yes, you are, and that will not affect your chances of getting this grant. As Elisa talked through, the way that that recipients are going to be selected is looking through the equity matrix first, and then from that, then there will be the lottery after the fact. What else? So we had some questions. If more than one person can apply, if they live in the same household, the answer to that is yes, they can. Ideally, we don't want people applying for the same expenses. So if your rent, for the past 4 months was $2,000 total, you both could not apply for offsetting that cost. But if you, for example, wanted to use it to offset the cost of 1 month, and maybe someone else from your household was using it to offset the cost for a different month, that's okay. Let's see, other necessities. Yes, that could include phone and internet bills that you might have. We had a question about, do you have to show all expenses or only expenses up to $2,000? So we only need to see the expenses up to $2,000. Obviously, your expenses are probably going to be far beyond $2,000 for the past 4 months. So no need to show everything, just the $2,000 worth. Let's see. So we had a question about if you need to edit your CV down to just the past 2 years or leave everything off before 2018. We don't want to create more work for any of you. If you have a CV that shows active participation in Austin for the past 2 years and then some beyond that, just upload that, and that's totally fine. If you want to, so we won't be looking at things past 2018. You don't get extra points if you show 50 years worth of creative work in Austin. It's just verifying that you've been an active creative worker for 2 years. Let's see. We had a question about how to describe your annual income. And so that's obviously 2020 is going to be far different than previous years. So it would probably be best to look at your 2019 or your 2018. You could do an average of those two. But it doesn't have to be an estimate for your 2020 annual earnings. Let's see. For creative workers who are part of an organization or collaborative, can expenses include organizational costs such as rent on office, studio, storage space? So that's a great question. This grant is specifically to individuals. The way that council created this resolution was for individual relief from the pandemic. So that can be rent for your home space, for your, for where you live, but it should not be for an organization. Hopefully that helps. What else? If you receive unemployment, are you still eligible? Yes, of course, you would still be eligible for this. This is an offset of past costs, and unemployment is current and future. So that's not a problem at all. So we're here until 2 o'clock. So as you have questions, please feel free to answer them or ask them in the chat. Feel free to hang around. As Elisa mentioned, there's going to be a recording of this webinar in the next few days, and that will be on the ATX Recover site as well. So you're welcome to come back and watch this as often as you'd like. The application itself, we've had a lot of interest already since we opened the program yesterday at 10. So it is going to be extremely competitive. So just, making sure everyone knows that. Um, let's see. Are playbills with named credits a good example of documentation? Yes, that's absolutely fine. If you've been an actor for the past few years in Austin and you have playbills that have, the date and the location, and it's a theater in the Austin area, that's totally fine. Can those who are not named in credits but credited by their union, can their union card count as documentation? That's a great question. I think it could count. I think personally, I would wonder if it's maybe just as easy to have a resume or a CV, and have it backed up with your union card. Let's see what else here. Um, Mentions that applicants will be notified 10 days after submitting, but the slide said everyone will be notified 10 days after the 28th. So the program closes next Friday, the 28th at 5 p.m. 10 business days after that puts us, I think it's September 14th, because of Labor Day. So everyone will be notified one way or the other within that week of the 14th. And so, you could potentially hear from one of the case managers at the BBB before then if there's a question around documentation or something like that. But for the most part, we're aiming to notify everyone that week of September 14th. Can barbers apply? So this is, so we've had some questions about what constitutes a creative worker. We know that there's a lot of gray zone for some creative and cultural workers. If you yourself identify as a creative worker and you have documentation to back that up, when you fill out the application, you have to check a box that says that you attest to this information being correct under penalty of law and everything like that. So basically, we're putting the onus on the applicant to identify if they are a creative worker or not. You need to identify one of the cultural sectors and disciplines that you work in. But, somebody that does hair and makeup for a film production crew or someone that does things for an opera, maybe their job title doesn't sound like it fits in the typical categories, but they work in a sector that does count. As long as you have documentation around that, you can apply. Let's see. Family member with a disability, would that work for proof of expense? So this is a good question. So you don't need to show proof of expense in the application. So all we need to see from you all for this application is how this is going to help offset your expenses from March 1 until August 17th. So if you were selected for a grant and we got audited, either the city, the state, or at the federal level, if we were audited and we came back to you, then you would have to provide documentation of the expenses. And those could be receipts. It could be, any kind of lease agreement or something like that. So if, so you don't need to show proof of expense for the application itself. That would come afterwards if audited. If you normally pay for a family member's expense, we don't care if the credit card is on your name or her name. If you are the caregiver, then that counts as part of her expenses, then that's fine. This grant is just for individuals. Does it mean individuals within a group have to submit applications separately? Yes. So if you're in a band or if you're in an artist collective or something like that, each member of the collective could apply for a separate $2,000. You don't need to apply for $2,000 and try to split it amongst 5 people. The idea is this is individual relief. Um, Band managers, yes, band managers are eligible. Your website can be used to prove that you have been a working artist for 2 years. Yes, Tracy, that works. For websites, you can either have a link to your website on a PDF that you upload, or you could take a screenshot of your website, whatever is easiest. Um, uh, let's see. I primarily do art and craft shows for a living. How do I show? I participated in creative work for the past 2 years. So we're basically looking at if you have done, a few craft shows, since August of 2018 through now. If you can show that you've been doing things in 2018 and 2019, that's totally fine. Let's see, there's a question about taxable income. For that, as Kyle, you can step in here if I speak out of turn, but for the most part, we're not allowed to give any kind of tax advice. We can point you to the IRS website about CARES Act funding and where it comes from and how it might be taxable or not to you as an individual, but we have to legally steer clear of giving anyone tax advice. So we have a question on the website in the FAQs that links to the IRS page. So maybe Kyle, you could throw that in the chat if you find it. The best box for a mixed media visual artist to check. So I think that's probably going to be a tough one for a lot of creatives. We know that you all wear many, many hats. And so you can either flip a coin and say, I want to be in this creative discipline, or pick what you think most identifies with the work that you do. It might be visual arts. I think there's something for mixed media. You basically have to pick one. And we know that that's going to be difficult for a lot of people, but it's not like we have certain buckets of money for each discipline. Some of you may be familiar with how council passed the resolution for nonprofits. And with the nonprofit relief program, there were certain buckets that said, okay, this amount is going to be allocated to arts and culture workers or nonprofits. This amount is going to be for healthcare nonprofits. There wasn't that same directive for the creative worker relief grant. So pick one and that will be fine. Let's see what else. Can contracted employees of live music venues qualify for this grant or only W-2 employees? So any employee of a live music venue can apply. So if you are employed by the live music venue itself as an actual official employee that receives a W-2, or if you are a temporary worker, or if you're a freelance worker that maybe you're a freelance lighting technician or something like that, and you don't, and you can, you go to many venues across the city, that's totally fine. Either work. For food expenses, could credit card or bank statements count as eligible documentation? Yes, if audited and we came back, then you could pull your bank statements and highlight things, and that would be totally fine. What else? How would a subcontracted venue or event person prove they are associated to the venue? So for that one, that's, again, it comes back to how you're documenting your work. So if you have on your resume, the venues that you've been working with, that's totally fine. If you have a letter from a venue manager, that they can attest to the fact that you've been working for a few years at that space, that's also okay. I see that Sergey has raised his hand. I might recommend, Sergey, if you could please ask your question in the chat box itself, please, because all participants are muted at the moment. So I'm going to please point you to the chat box. And Kyle just put the IRS information, the link to the IRS information in the chat in case you all want to do some more research as far as if it counts as taxable income for you or not. Let's see, is Form 1099 acceptable as proof of active participation? I mean, yes. Yes. But again, you know, we would encourage you to kind of think about this as what, you know, I keep thinking about, like, what does your portfolio look like? What does your resume look like? How are you, you know, demonstrating this? We don't necessarily want, you know, your social security number and things that might be on a 1099 form. So I would, I mean, yes, it could count, but I don't know if that would be the best way to go.
Could redact it, could they?
Oh, Cynthia, you just you said, could they redact the information and then upload it? Yes, I mean, yes, they could. You know, that counts as obviously it counts as proof for the federal government, so obviously that would count as proof for us as well. We just, you know, we want to be careful around sensitive information. So we had a question around non-English webinars. So we have a Spanish webinar that's going to happen on Thursday, this Thursday at 4:30. The registration link is also on the website. We have the deck that Elisa went through earlier that will be posted on the website, as long as the deck in Spanish, and the recordings of these webinars. If you know someone that wants a copy of the webinar in another language, please reach out to us and we can make that happen for you. The application itself is in 5 different languages. So we have, there's a link for the English application, the Spanish application, there's Vietnamese, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and what is the other one that I'm forgetting? Traditional Chinese and
Vietnamese.
there are 2 different Chinese
Yeah.
ones.
The Mandarin and the
Yes, thank you. Let's see. Should the resume also include work from January 2020 or only 18 to 19? If I was applying, I would probably have something from 2018 through now. Obviously, we know that through now might look wildly different than what it has in the past. But I think it probably would be best to show your work from at least August of 2018 through August of 2020 to cover your bases. So again, if people are just joining us, we already went through the formal part of the presentation and that will be posted on the website later. We're here for another 20 minutes and happy to answer any questions that you throw in the chat. Let's see. Are there plans or hints that there will be another round of funding for more grants? Wouldn't we all love to know, Ryan Gallagher? We honestly, we have no idea right now. You know, the city of Austin, we received the CARES Act funding and council passed resolutions to allocate those funds in certain ways. So, you know, rent assistance, small business assistance, nonprofit assistance, various individual assistance buckets. That's all we have to go from right now. So as soon as the city knows if we receive more funding, we'll be rolling out programs as we can. But yes, this is all coming from CARES Act funds for the city of Austin. And we really, you know, we said this at the beginning, but we really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today to go through this grant program. We're here for you. As you know, we know that it's a struggle for everyone right now, and we're in it together. Let's see, the length of time to show expenses for. As said earlier, the expenses, the funds for this grant are to offset costs from March 1st of 2020 through August 17th, 2020. So that's the length of time. So you just have to demonstrate where that $2,000 would go to help you. So again, we're here for another 15 minutes. Feel free to stay and hang out, head on with your day, whatever you need. Can people apply for the city rent program that starts tomorrow and not conflict? Yes, absolutely. Jinx to Kyle on that one. Again, if you are receiving unemployment, you are still very eligible to apply for this grant. These are just, so we had a question about, do you need to include both business and personal expenses? Again, this is a grant that's for, I mean, it ultimately depends on how you register your business. This is meant to be for an individual. So, you know, this is for things like rent. This is things like food, medical expenses, supplies, maybe for your art practice. Those are eligible. I'm pretty confident that everyone would probably be able to show $2,000 of personal expenses for the past 2 years. So I would say focus on personal and things that go towards your artistic practice. For folks that just joined us, yes, we're going to have the presentation itself. So we'll have a PDF of the deck in English and Spanish on our website. And we'll also have recordings of the English webinar and a recording of the Spanish webinar posted to the website by the end of the week for sure. We'll try to have the English one posted in the next 48 hours though. So again, atxrecovers.com, that's going to be your landing page, one-stop shop for all the things. So there's a link to the Creative Worker Program that you can find the FAQs, where the recordings will be, all of that. And it's also a great resource. The atxrecovers.com in general is a great thing to have saved because other relief programs will also be be posted there. And so the rent relief that Ryan was mentioning, that information will be on there as well. And again, thank you all for taking the time to join us today for this webinar. We have just over 10 minutes, so if you have any burning questions, feel free to ask them now.
About how many people applied yesterday?
Cool. So that's a great question, Cynthia. I am not entirely sure if we're supposed to share the specific number. It'll be posted on the dashboard later this week. So similar to our other programs, on the Creative Worker Relief Grant site, there'll be the dashboard that basically shows this is how many people applied, in what districts, in what disciplines, and it's a great resource for both the public as well as for City Council. You know, for this one, we've received well over 1,000 applications submitted already. So it's, as we mentioned, it's going to be competitive. But we strongly encourage everyone that is able to apply to this program to please apply. We know that we won't be able to fund everyone as much as we would like to, but having a strong number to turn around and show leadership and say, look, we've received X number of applicants and we only had this amount of funds, that makes a really strong statement for why the creative workers should have another round of funding if something were to come down the pipeline later. So, you know, I know it's not ideal that we can't fund everyone, but it's still really, really important to apply because, you know, someone's going to get funded. How many grants will be provided? It's probably going to be around, what was it? I think around 1,600 some applicants will receive grants. It obviously depends, the exact number depends, because some people might be receiving the $2,000 level, but if some people that received music disaster relief program or music disaster relief funds, and they're only eligible for $1,000 from this funding pot, then it could be more. So the exact number we won't really know until we finish everything and we close the application portal. It's so lovely to see some of your faces. It's been a long time. So again, thank you so much for participating today. And it looks like, Sergey, you still have your hand raised. I'm not sure if your question was able to be answered in the chat, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And the formal presentation will be available on ATX Recovers soon. So now we just have the next 9 minutes to stare at each other. So that's also fun. And again, I know we've said this a bunch, but the BBB and Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts and our community champions like Amy with Asian American Community Partnership and Cynthia with La Peña. This program really wouldn't be possible without these amazing partners to the city, and we appreciate you and the work that you're doing so much. So thank you. If people have questions, they're always welcome to reach out to anyone on the team, and we'll be happy to help find answers to things. But special shout out to our grand group of co-working partners. Let's see. Oh, yay, another question. Okay. Although we are inquiries coming in, yeah, so if you're getting a lot of questions, you're welcome to send them to Tala. They're probably the best starting point to help with things, but also the FAQs on the website, hopefully they can help everyone apply if you have people coming to you directly. Creatives that work a job to supplement, can they still apply? Yes. So, we totally understand that, a lot of creative workers, they are a creative worker and something else to help make ends meet. They might be a creative worker in many different ways, but as long as you have been an active creative worker in Austin for 2 years, then you can apply. And any other job, extra job that you might have to help supplement, that's totally fine.
So really, there's no income ceiling.
So that's a great question, Cynthia. Thank you for helping to clarify. So one of the questions in the application asks what your average annual earnings are. And so you just check the box to kind of say what brackets you're in. There's, as Elisa went through earlier, there's an equity scoring matrix. And so all applicants will be scored on the equity matrix, and those, there's racial diversity in there, there's vulnerability, there's income, all of these things play a part in what the score is for an applicant, but there isn't a cap. So I know in the small business relief grant, for example, there was an income cap. So if a business made more than $5 million, they would be ineligible to apply. We don't have something like that for this program. And then it looks like we had another question about letters from venues to verify they hired you. That the letters were geared toward applying for a previous grant earlier this year. If you have documentation from a venue saying that they hired you to do work, that's fine. It doesn't matter if it's addressed to someone else. That should be fine. Not sure how to lay out my required documentation for all the art shows. Are there examples available anywhere? So Lisa, I would maybe recommend talking to Elisa and her team over at Tala to help with working out how you could lay out your required documentation. Different people have different ways to show their work, whether it's in a resume or a portfolio or a website. So I would say reach out to Elisa and her team at Tala to help with that. All right, final few moments. I don't know, Elisa or Sarah, if either of you wanted to add anything before we close for today.
I'll just say that I'm with BBB for those who joined late, but we're happy to answer any technical questions you've got about accessing the application, completing it, accessing it to make an update, any of those kinds of things. We're happy to partner with Tala in answering any of those kinds of questions that you have.
Thanks for hosting us today. I'm Elisa with Tala, and please call us if you have any questions about the application. We would love to get you registered and get you applied for the money. Like I said, we are answering our phones in person from 9 to 6 every day and at some other time. So please feel free to call us or send an email. And if we don't answer or we're not online at that moment, we will get back with you as soon as we can.
All right, and then we just saw one question that just came in about someone that lived in Austin for a number of years, then moved to Dallas, and then just came back here in April of 2019. Are they eligible for this grant? I don't want to end on like a no right now. But the idea is that for the past 2 years, so to be eligible for this grant, you have to be an active creative worker in Austin for 2 years. So we can talk more offline about that maybe, but the idea is that you've been here in Austin for at least 2 years and can show active documentation of work for those past 2 years. So, so that might be a no, but we appreciate you being a part of this webinar and asking great questions. All right. Again, everything is going to be on the ATX Recovers website. Huge shout out to our great team with Amy and Cynthia and Elisa and Sarah, my coworker Kyle, whom I don't think I even introduced at the beginning. Sorry, Kyle, but I appreciate you a lot. So everything will be on the website, and please reach out to us for any questions. Thank you all so much.